In an urgent and tense congressional hearing, top military and diplomatic figures, including General Charles Flynn, Admiral Mark Montgomery, and former Deputy Secretary of State Kirk Campbell, delivered a stark warning. The clock is ticking on preventing a catastrophic conflict in the Indo-Pacific. The session saw sharp exchanges over the adequacy of current deterrence strategies and the desperate need to accelerate preparations, painting a grim picture of escalating threats and a rapidly closing window for action.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. And this hearing today is not just another discussion about long-term competition with China. This is about a very real, near-term threat and the narrowing window we have to prevent a catastrophic conflict in the Indo-Pacific. She has ordered the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan by force by 2027. Xi's directive is backed by the largest military buildup since World War II on land, at sea, in the skies, in space, and across cyberspace. What does China's military buildup really tell us about its intent? How do we help Taiwan turn its strategy into reality and actually get U.S. systems delivered on time? What are the most urgent gaps in U.S. force posture and capabilities, especially across the First Island chain? What cyber threats could blind or cripple our response before a shot is even fired? And what steps can we take now with our allies and partners to build multilateral deterrence that Xi can't ignore? Let me close with this. We are not seeking war. We are trying to prevent one. And prevention only works if Xi believes that the cost of aggression is too high to bear. That requires action, serious enough, visible enough, and fast enough to shift the risk calculation in Beijing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for convening this important hearing on this critical topic, the deep ties between Taiwan and the U.S. and the CCP's growing threat to Taiwan and, by extension, America and the world. But first, there's a problem we need to address, Mr. Chairman. Americans don't know much about Taiwan. Take this scene from the latest season of the hit HBO series White Lotus, which takes place in Thailand, but one of the leads, Victoria, confuses it for somewhere else.
We're here to check out this meditation center because I'm gonna live there for at least the next year.
You want to live in Taiwan?
At least she confuses Thailand for Taiwan, not China. But Victoria is not alone in her geographic illiteracy. 3 years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Taiwan for my first time with then Speaker Pelosi. After the trip, this poll by Morning Consult was taken asking Americans if they could find Taiwan on a map. It turns out that only 34% of Americans can correctly identify Taiwan, which is that green dot on the map. A lot of people thought Taiwan was in other places, where these yellow dots indicate even up in the Arctic Circle in Russia. This hearing is important for many reasons, not necessarily to teach geography, but as an opportunity to clearly explain to Americans why Taiwan is so important. First, I want to talk about values. When I've been to Taiwan, I've been bowled over by how amazingly vibrant Taiwan's democracy is. Let me show you this scene here. This is the celebration in Taiwan after President William Lai was inaugurated last May. Now, Mr. Chair, you and I were in Taiwan right before this particular celebration, and I'm upset that we missed the party with street dancers, tiger costumes, and that big blue horse. In contrast, this was the CCP's recent celebration of Xi Jinping getting an unelected third term, setting up to be dictator for life. So here you have the contrast. On one side of the strait, you have a one-party dictatorship, and on the other side is Taiwan, a democracy doing everything it can to make sure that, in the words of one great Illinoisan, government of the people, by the people, and for the people does not perish from the earth. This brings me to my second point, which is about the economy. A lot of Americans may not appreciate just how essential Taiwan is for our own prosperity in America. Taiwan is America's 7th largest trading partner, and it is a huge, huge market for U.S. exports. Take my home state of Illinois, for example. Taiwan, believe it or not, is the second largest importer of Illinois corn and the third largest importer of Illinois soybeans. Soybeans, Dusty. Taiwan is also a major investor. Since 2022, Taiwan's investment in America has skyrocketed, surging from $1 billion in 2022 to $14 billion just 2 years later in 2024. This includes the first installment of $165 billion in investment that one Taiwan semiconductor company alone is going to make, namely TSMC. This brings me to my final point. Before Taiwan's election last year, the CCP said that the results would mean, quote, peace or war. I showed you how Taiwan celebrated its successful democratic election, but the PLA responded just a little differently, practicing a blockade and a missile attack on Taiwan. This is a clip courtesy of Chinese state television. A little ominous, if you ask me, but that's how they greeted the results of the election. We know that Xi Jinping has ordered the PLA to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, and that clip gave you a visual of what a prelude to a possible invasion could look like. According to a recent study, a conflict over Taiwan would be absolutely devastating for the world. It would drop global GDP by a staggering $10 trillion, or 10% in one single year. And as you can see, a war over Taiwan would be much, much worse than even the COVID pandemic at its height. Losing access to Taiwan semiconductors alone would push the U.S. into a, quote, immediate Great Depression. People would die, and our economy would crash. America, as the chairman mentioned before, America does not want a war over Taiwan. A CCP attack on Taiwan would be unacceptable for our prosperity, our security, and our values. Chairman Xi, know that America, on a bipartisan basis, stands for peace across the Taiwan Strait. However, we will not tolerate actions that put peace at risk.
Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses today. I want to start with General Charles Flynn, is the former Commanding General of the United States Army Pacific, a four-star command that made him the Army's senior official in the Pacific. We're grateful for his decades of service and for joining us today. Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery is the Senior Director of FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. He previously, for more than 30 years in the United States Navy, including as Director of Operations at U.S. Pacific Command and as Commander of Carrier Strike Group 5. And finally, we are joined by the Honorable Kurt Campbell, who most recently was the 22nd United States Deputy Secretary of State. He currently serves as Chairman and co-founder of the Asia Group. I want to welcome all of you and appreciate you being with us.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the committee, thanks for inviting me to testify today. The threat of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is no longer distant or theoretical. The urgency to restore credible deterrence in the Indo-Pacific has never been greater. Taiwan's security is not only about protecting a vibrant democracy, it is about preserving regional stability, defending U.S. interests, and maintaining the credibility of our alliance network from Japan to the Philippines, from Australia to India. It's about defending our homeland and gaining forward positional advantage. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, is China's primary instrument for forcibly invading and unifying Taiwan. And among its branches, the PLA Army is the decisive force. We must stop pretending that this is just a naval or air power problem. If the PLA Army cannot land, cannot maneuver, cannot hold ground, and cannot subjugate the people of Taiwan, it cannot win. If we can prevent them from even attempting to cross, we deter the war altogether. For far too long, we've invested in exquisite systems to fight a sea and air campaign, but left ourselves exposed where it matters most, on land, where wars are won or lost. Land power, not in isolation, but as the backbone that enables the interdependencies of the joint force, is what enables deterrence. It creates persistence, builds partnerships, is resilient, and develops the deep infrastructure that sustains the fight, providing the operational endurance we need. No other service delivers long-range fires, integrated air and missile defense, theater sustainment, command and control, and mobility across scale like the U.S. Army. These are not future capabilities. They are being fielded now through multi-domain task forces, logistics hubs, and joint fires networks in Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and beyond. But we need to go further and faster. We must establish a distributed, resilient land power posture across the first and second island chains, backed by rapid access agreements, robust joint exercises, and pre-positioned equipment that accelerates our response times. This is not just a U.S. Army issue. Our most capable partners in Asia, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, India, and Indonesia, all field large and capable armies. If we integrate them, if we train and network them to operate with U.S. forces, we create an Indo-Pacific land power network that multiplies deterrence tenfold. The PLA does not fear our ships and aircraft. In fact, they expect them. It has built an A2AD arsenal to deny them. What it fears is a credible force that can counter its army on its flanks, in its interior, before it assembles and loads, and before it ever reaches Taiwan. That's what forward-positioned, allied land power brings to the table. This approach is more sustainable and more affordable than betting on billion-dollar platforms that are vulnerable to missile saturation, electronic warfare, fragile supply chains, and other emerging threats. Instead of chasing perfection, what we need is persistent presence. Hard to kill, hard to ignore capabilities anchored in both geography and partnerships. This includes asymmetric defense investments by Taiwan. I support President Lai's emphasis on mobile survivable systems, but these must be paired with deep civil-military integration, reserve reforms, territorial defense strategies, and above all, training, and more training. A resilient society helps deny the PLA the quick, clean victory it seeks and shifts the cost calculus back onto Beijing. Now, how do we operationalize this? Let me highlight three key Army capabilities that matter most in the Indo-Pacific. First, mobile ground-based strike systems like Typhoon and HIMARS can disrupt PLA planning and decision-making. We need more of these, longer ranges, reloadable, mobile, and fully networked into a joint fires web. Second, the Army's multi-domain task forces. They bring together long-range sensing, cyber, space, AI, electronic warfare, and fires into a seamless operational construct. These units provide targeting, deception, and control across all domains and must remain a top investment priority. Third, none of this works without sustainment. The Army leads in logistics, medical support, engineering, depot-level supply maintenance, and inland transport. It's the backbone of the entire joint concept. Without Army sustainment, agile combat employment from the Air Force and expeditionary basing cannot function. We must push forward AI-enabled manufacturing, co-production, maintenance, and pre-positioned stocks now, not later. Army forces also build lasting regional partnerships that no other service can. These relationships secure terrain, both physical and human terrain, and they build the security architecture that binds the region together. That's real deterrence. So I'm going to urge this committee to consider a strategic realignment, expand joint campaigning with Army-led partners, invest in long-range precision fires, integrated air and missile defense, AI, EW, resilient networks and theater logistics, build and strengthen the land power coalition that already wants to work with us, and recognize the PLA Army as the decisive threat vector for Taiwan. You can't invade Taiwan unless you can generate an invasion force, and that is what we must prevent. So let me close with this. Deterrence is not a speech and it's not a flyover. It's not a sanction or a carrier patrol. Deterrence is the sum of this equation: posture plus capability plus messaging plus will. It requires persistent presence, it demands deep partnerships, and it is the certainty in the mind of the adversary that aggression will fail. We still have time to prevent war, and we must, but time is not on our side. A focused land power strategy integrated with our allies and synchronized across the joint force is how we deny the PLA its objective: preserve peace in the Indo-Pacific.
As we speak, America's ability to defeat a Chinese attack on Taiwan is eroding. Beijing's military readiness has benefited from a 30-year investment focused on advanced technologies that specifically target U.S. vulnerabilities. In the face of this threat, America's ability to deter China is withering, and thus the risk of a conflict is growing. One of the biggest challenges that the United States and Taiwan face is that we need to prepare for the most dangerous scenarios, the cross-strait invasions, the maritime blockades, but in addition, we have to prepare for the most likely scenario. That's a comprehensive, cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign. Because a cross-strait invasion or blockade would cause the most destruction on Taiwan, I think Beijing will want to force Taiwan's capitulation through less drastic methods, like a comprehensive pressure campaign that targets the financial, the energy, and the telecommunication sectors. And I think this will be facilitated by malicious cyber activity and military feints that further stress Taiwan's societal resilience. And back here in the American homeland, China is also going to employ the same malicious cyber activity to weaken our critical infrastructures and paralyze our American military mobility and readiness. China is also certain to conduct influence operations aimed at weakening Taiwanese and American public support for action and freezing our national security decision-making processes. But as tough as things may look, continued congressional action can reverse these dangerous trends. My written testimony identified 20 recommendations across two broad lines of effort that Taiwan and America can take. That first line of effort is about siege-proofing Taiwan and enhancing its ability to defend itself, because no country can or should do more to prepare Taiwan to defend Taiwan than Taiwan. To confront the most dangerous scenarios, Taiwan has to properly resource its military forces. That means Taiwan needs to spend 3% of their GDP on defense this year, and they need to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2028. And this money should be used to build both counter-intervention ground forces to oppose that cross-strait invasion, as well as fund air and naval capabilities to oppose a blockade. Deterrence will only work if Taiwan credibly prepares for both of these most dangerous scenarios. But organizing and equipping Taiwan's forces will also require the United States to be a better, more effective partner. The stories of egregious foreign military sales delays are not anecdotal. They're persistent. And alongside that foreign military sales, the U.S. should maximize its military assistance to Taiwan through FMF, Presidential Drawdown Authorities, and Congress's new Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative. Taiwan is too small to handle the Chinese challenge alone. We should also pre-position munitions in Taiwan by establishing a stockpile program similar to the ones that we have in Israel and Korea. And we should expand our joint training and exercise programs. And I'd start by growing the joint training team developed by General Flynn out to about 1,000 people. Alongside this military-oriented preparation, Taiwan also has to prepare for that most likely scenario, a cyber and economic campaign designed to break Taiwan's societal resilience and force Taipei to bend the knee without a damaging ground war. The second line of effort is about us, protecting America's ability to respond to and win a war in the Western Pacific. China is pre-positioning disruptive and destructive cyber capabilities in U.S. critical infrastructures. They're also developing cruise, ballistic, and hypersonic missiles that can impact the U.S. homeland. Beijing wants to disrupt America's ability to fight, and we must not let that happen. In the cyber realm, the United States needs to improve the security of our rail, aviation, and port sectors to ensure that we can reliably move forces from forts to ports. Congress should investigate using the National Guard to conduct some of this defense of America's critical assets. Similarly, we need to build our societal resilience against Chinese malign influence. Last year, Congress wisely took a critical step by requiring the sale of TikTok. Any White House effort to save TikTok must ensure ByteDance is divested of its control over the TikTok algorithm. In missile defense, the Golden Dome effort could be a great first step if it focuses on a long-term, space-based approach to defending the homeland. And we need to double down on America's investments in hypersonic defense. At this moment, we have no answer to Chinese maneuvering hypersonic missiles. Finally, we need to create an independent cyber service in order to maximize cyber force generation and allow U.S. Cyber Command to compete with China's exploding cyber capabilities.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Let me commend this committee for the manner in which you've undertaken your business. It's been bipartisan in an environment that there's scarcely very much cooperation. The work that you've done has been path-breaking and informed our work over the last several years, and it continues
today, and I want to just suggest to you that it is a model of how we should undertake our work. It is also the case, first of all, I'm grateful to be joined with such wonderful patriots who've devoted so much of their careers not only to the maintenance of peace and stability in the Western Pacific, but also to American power in the Indo-Pacific. I will say that this peace and stability which we enjoy across the Taiwan Strait is largely a result of legislative action. This is the example of legislative leadership, beginning with the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, continuing with the work subsequently, enhancing Taiwan's defense capabilities, ensuring that both parties remain vigilant to the threats and the challenges, and that we stand firm behind Taiwan. So that needs to continue. I think it's critical and vital. Second point, just very quickly, the ranking member described Taiwan. The truth is, this is an enormous achievement by the Taiwanese people, but we should take some credit for that. What Taiwan has achieved technologically, democratically, the resilience of their society. To be honest, I can remember visiting several years ago during a very difficult election period thinking, oh my gosh, look at the challenges that they're facing. Their democracy, in many respects, is more resilient than our own. This is a remarkable achievement. They are a partner with us in so many different ways, and this should be commended and embraced. Third thing, just to underscore, for decades, it was only the United States that was recognizing and supporting Taiwan's importance. But over the course of the last several years, something remarkable has happened. Many of our allies and partners are joining with us in engaging Taiwan, and they are speaking out publicly that they too have an interest in the maintenance and peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Now, the gentleman sitting next to me can tell you all the important elements of deterrence on the military side, but I will also tell you Beijing takes notice in how other countries respond, and the fact that we've gone from one or two countries talking about the importance to Taiwan to absolutely dozens now is an enormous achievement, not only of this body, but the United States, and that should continue. Fourth, just quickly on capabilities. You've heard a lot about what needs to be done with respect to the indigenous military and defensive capabilities of Taiwan. I stand with the gentleman here on those issues. I would differ slightly with the general. I believe that this is a naval theater, but that's probably sort of an intramural thing that we can get to. I'll talk to you mostly what I think is as important as anything else. The Taiwan Relations Act insists that we maintain the capabilities to maintain peace and stability, to respond to challenges in the Western Pacific. And I do fundamentally agree with my colleagues that we need to do more about our own capabilities. And I'll just, from my own experience over the past 30 years working on these issues, I'll just tell you where I think the big issues are focused. First of all, I do not believe we can take this challenge on by ourselves. We need much deeper engagement with our allies and partners, and that means Japan, that means South Korea, that means Australia, that also means increasingly countries like India and Vietnam, and I will also tell you countries in Europe who also believe that the maintenance of peace and stability is in our interests. We need much greater integration militarily and strategically. We need to embrace these partnerships that go way beyond what we've done in the past, and I think that's critically important. Shipbuilding, something that you all have focused on that we've struggled with. Critical munitions. I was struck very early in the Ukraine crisis at how difficult it was for us to produce what we needed domestically. We're going to need to do this more with allies and partners. And so while I think it is critical that you focus on what Taiwan needs to do and how we need to support Taiwan, remember that we are the ultimate backstop, and we must keep our capabilities shifting more of our capacity to the Indo-Pacific, recognizing that this is where the ultimate challenge to American power is in the 21st century. Last thing, I'm going to say this carefully if I can. I agree that we are facing enormous challenges from Beijing, but we must be honest that some of the biggest challenges that we're facing are debates here in the United States. We occasionally hear discussion about spheres of interests and influence, and maybe this is too far for us and it's in another major authoritarian country's neighborhood and we should look at this differently. Those concepts are contrary to our strategic interests. They are un-American, and they do not align with our historic responsibilities, our commitments, and what we all believe in. And so I'm asking, not only are you inviting us in today to discuss with you, I'm asking for this committee's leadership to make clear that our interests stand clearly with continuing our vibrant support of the Taiwanese people and what they've achieved technologically, politically, and strategically over the course of the last 40 years with our strong support. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Now we'll move to questions, and I'd like to begin with General Flynn. In your testimony, you mentioned that America's window for strategic decision-making is closing and that we must accelerate our own preparations. Can you help us better understand the stakes in the starkest terms possible, given your decades of service, and are we currently moving with enough urgency to, as you put it, accelerate our preparation?
Chairman, no, we're not. I guess I'll just describe, from 2014 to 2024, when I left command, what the Chinese military were doing 10 years ago compared to what they're doing today is dramatically different. And that trajectory that they're on is what we actually have to slow down. The problem is that our organic industrial base is a precursor to our defense industrial base, and they're anemic. And so when Mr. Campbell mentioned about precision munitions and shipbuilding, I'm for all of that. In fact, we need that. In fact, the region needs it because they don't have big air forces and big navies. The U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force must keep the global commons open. But part of the problem is that the thing I lacked as U.S. Army Pacific Commander, and I would say that the combatant commander did as well, was sort of persistent logistics hubs forward, where you could have stores, co-production, you could have distributed and agile locations to be able to draw on those stores. And of course, this requires a really important dance between the Department of State and the Department of Defense to have those locations open and available, although we have things available today. And so I just think the window, Chairman, is narrowing, but it's also narrowing for China as well. So it's not all bad news. President Xi is 71. He'll be 81 in 10 years. And I know that this window of 27 is still, sort of on the table. Are they rehearsing? Are they preparing? Absolutely. But I also think that we're in a very good position to be able to counter them because we have this advantage, and that advantage is the partnerships of the allies and partners in the region. So when we can bring them together as a counterweight to the thing that they try to fragment and fracture every day is our network of allies and partners. So in summary, what I would say is our organic industrial base and defense industrial base, we need your help to get those things moving much faster. But that's not going to get us out of the problem because China is still moving with great speed. Therefore, we have to put capabilities forward, gain positional advantage forward in the region, and we have to do that with our allies and partners, the thing that we enjoy most. And I'll make the point, on the ground where people live, out in these countries, out in these districts, out in these various interior lands in the country, that's where Army forces, along with special operations, along with Marines, along with the sizable armies that are in this region. I mean, one statistic that I want to put on the table right now, the Philippines is 7,500 islands. It's an archipelagic nation. 70% of its military is its army. They have more divisions than the U.S. Army does. They turn to their armies, they turn to their land powers to be able to protect their territorial integrity and protect their national sovereignty. And what I'm saying is if we match up with them, we're going to be a much different place in terms of assurance and deterrence because those things are going to have to happen on the ground. And back to the organic industrial base, the more we bring systems forward, the more that they become closer by way of interoperability. I just read yesterday that the Taiwanese did their first live fire with HIMARS. They just bought 29 HIMARS. And you all know where we're going with HIMARS. I had that comment in my opening. That is an incredibly important system. The Japanese, the Philippines are each buying long-range anti-ship missiles. So the point being that that's the connection between technology, the organic and defense industrial base, and the work that we actually have to do on the ground to have hard power forward.
This is a sound of an air raid siren. It goes off 3 times a day in Taiwan when Chinese warplanes fly dangerously close to the island. Imagine Russian planes approaching American airspace. Last year, Russia flew warplanes into Alaska's air defense zone 36 times. In contrast, last year, Chinese warplanes flew into Taiwan's air defense zone more than 3,000 times. This is what it looks like. These red lines around the island are basically the path of Chinese warplanes as they traversed the air defense zone surrounding Taiwan. Admiral Montgomery, by doing this, the CCP is trying to wear down Taiwan's defenders and probe Taiwan for weaknesses, right?
Exactly. This is what we would call a maximum pressure campaign. They use these military tools, cyber tools, and other financial and energy tools to put a constant pressure on Taiwan's societal resilience. And then at some later date, they can just dial that up when they see that there's no Western response.
Let me turn to my last topic. While these air crossings happen almost daily, making invasion seem possible, a more likely scenario is a CCP-led blockade of the island. And here's how it could unfold. Step 1, the PLA calls snap exercises, like those after Speaker Pelosi's 2022 visit. You see all these ships surrounding the island. Step 2, instead of leaving, PLA warships stay in place, and then Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels fill the gaps, creating a de facto blockade, which, of course, is an act of war. Step 3, the real test comes when imports, like corn and soy from Illinois, Michigan, and, of course, South Dakota, try to reach Taiwan, as you see here, but they are stopped by the CCP. In that moment, we are on the brink of war. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, we were famously, quote-unquote, eyeball to eyeball with the Soviets, and the Soviets blinked first. But we don't want to get to that point where we need to be eyeball to eyeball with the CCP. So, General Flynn, you'd agree with me that one way Taiwan can deter a blockade is by stockpiling, for instance, corn, soy, natural gas, and so forth, right?
Yes, Ranking Member, absolutely.
What more, Secretary Campbell, do we need to do to show Xi Jinping that he should never think about trying to blockade Taiwan because it would fail?
Thanks. It's a multi-pronged strategy, frankly, Congressman. I completely agree with my colleagues about the things that we need to step up both Taiwan and our capabilities. I will say that deterrence comes with a recognition that if such steps were taken, that China would face the most brutal financial steps taken against it, not just by the United States, but by other countries as well. We also need more stepped-up military capabilities. I think the scenario that you paint, Congressman, is the most likely. Our answer to that, frankly, is our submarine force more than anything else. It is our jewel in the crown. What you all have done recommending that more steps be taken here. I'm a huge supporter of AUKUS. I believe if the United States, Australia, and Great Britain can step up our joint capabilities, that is a major deterrent. We need to keep that area of advantage where we are still 10, 15, 20 years ahead of Beijing and in operating in the undersea domain. As long as we have that, it would be very difficult to effect a successful blockade against Taiwan with those capabilities. That's the area that we need to double down on.
Sir, if I could add one cost-free idea. We need to begin practicing escorts and reflaggings with Taiwan. The other, you didn't mention it, but LNG, liquid natural gas, is the real, I think that's the first thing that's going to tighten them up during this. And we need to, ahead of the event, do reflagging and convoy escorts with the Taiwan Navy, practicing with LNGs, and even try to pull the Japanese into that as well, who are equally vulnerable to this. To me, that's a good cost-free way of signaling to China, we're not going to let this happen.
And that's what China wants. That's what China wants, is not to cut a deal with us, but to have us signal somehow that we're waning in our commitment, and they will then use that to go to Taiwan and say, see, your backer has lost its will. That is why the work of this committee is so important.
Well, you set me up for my next quick question, because I know I'm running short on time. I mean, clearly we know this. The CCP is the single greatest threat to global peace and security. We all agree on that. But across the world, we also know right now our allies and our partners are increasingly worried about us. A poll this spring in Japan showed that 48% of Japanese respondents believe that the international community cannot rely on the U.S. A shocking 77% doubted that they would come to Japan's defense in an emergency. In Taiwan, a poll showed similar trends. Over 57% of Taiwanese respondents felt that the U.S. was no longer dependable. And a Brookings poll showed similar declines in perception and trustworthiness, dependability, and favorability in South Korea towards the United States just in the last few months. Given this lack of trust, given the talk we had about the willingness to fight that Representative Moulton talked about in our allies and partners and in Taiwan, does this concern you that these perceptions are there in the first, second, and third island chain?
Is that to me?
Whoever wants to answer. I know I'm short on time.
I mean, what I would say is on the military side, that's not what I've seen. I've seen nothing but strengthening in our partnerships. The fact that we are actually there and that confidence that's gained by us being in those locations, I've seen nothing but a tightening of that, at least the military-to-military partnerships. And in a period of time when diplomacy is fractured or there's political fracturing, this is the power of having a mill-to-mill relationship and being able to overcome some of those rough waters.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I know I'm out of time, but I will just say, again, this is public perception, not the military action. It's what I'm getting at. The war will be fought on multiple fronts. We are secure in the defense side. We know that, but it's the war of the mind, and it's the war of the people and their will.
I would just say right now, I think the biggest challenge we face in terms of maintaining peace and stability is if our allies and partners lose confidence that we are the America with all of our warts and flaws that they've known for the last 40 or 50 years, and that we're backing away from our commitments to the maintenance of peace and stability. If we lose that edge, then I think the global circumstances will be very dangerous. Yes, indeed, Congressman.
The hearing wrapped with an unsettling sense of foreboding, leaving an undeniable impression of a region teetering on the brink. Despite the robust debate and calls for immediate action, the lingering questions about America's will and the effectiveness of its alliances highlighted a profound and potentially dangerous uncertainty in the face of China's aggressive ambitions.